You're at the Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub, where we enjoy conversations with people who are engaged in the world of coaching.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Coaching Inn. I'm your host, Claire Pedrick, and today it's my pleasure to have Chris Paterson returning to the Coaching Inn after a very long time. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much, Claire. It's lovely to be here.
We were talking in the office about coaching young people and how it was a place to explore and it was a place to see what was going on and all those things. And you emailed me like the same day. So I said, come and talk about it. So here you are. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. I think it's a fascinating topic and looking forward to exploring it together.
Fantastic. Well, just tell us a bit about your coaching journey. Because I want to catch up with you. What's happened since 2020?
Yeah. So I had a first career as a finance professional and went and worked in industry and was climbing a corporate ladder, which seemed to be going very well until I trained as a coach, an internal coach. And through some of those exercises, I realized I'd been climbing a ladder that was propped up against the wrong wall. And it caused me some challenges. I totally lost my sense of purpose. I actually, really struggled with my mental health. And it ultimately set me on a path that has been in the direction of coaching and facilitation ever since. And levels of fulfillment and joy in my work have increased exponentially. And one of the reflections I had from this experience was, first of all, I just wanted to coach anything that moved. But once I got over that, I started to ask myself why I had to wait till the age of 40 to experience coaching and how useful it would have been had I been coached earlier in my career. And it just so happened that I was on a kind of leadership development course where everyone had to come up with a project. And it had to impact at least 20 people. And that was the brief. And I don't know quite where the idea came from, but realizing that I couldn't do anything about the fact that I'd had to wait till I was 40 to be coached, the idea emerged, well, why not see if we can coach some young people and see what difference that makes. And so I was lucky enough to discover a charity that it was kind of being given space in the office building that I was working in, who happened to be working with young people. And so they helped get contact with some schools and some universities, and I managed to recruit some coaches who were willing to give their time for free. And we did this project, and somehow from kind of, in about a 2-month time frame, 20 young people experienced coaching for the first time. And I thought, okay, great, done my project, tick, move on. Then people said to me, Chris, that was good. When are you doing it again? I was like, that wasn't part of the plan. But we kept going, and fast forward 10 years now, and I describe myself as the accidental founder of a charity amongst some of the other things that I get up to.
Wow. And the charity is now doing?
So we're still coaching young people. We are still pretty small as charities go. In fact, we're tiny. Last year, I think 30 young people signed up to be coached. This year, and we're talking about school years here. Yeah. This year so far, we're up to 27. So we're growing, and one of the reasons we're still quite small is because we're a charity that doesn't fundraise. So everything is done on a voluntary basis, and for the students to be able to access coaching, they have to do at least 6 hours of voluntary work of their choice.
Nice.
To qualify them to be coached. And so the idea is that they learn something about themselves through volunteering. The coaches learn something about themselves by volunteering their time. The corporate lawyers who give their time for free learn about charity law, and the IT person who's helping us out gets to stretch and develop themselves in ways that they wouldn't ordinarily. And so everyone who's involved volunteers, and everyone learns something about themselves through volunteering.
I love how you have an equity of fair exchange in there. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I'm guessing that even the volunteering makes a difference before the coaching.
Well, yes, I think it does. It can be difficult to get the data. There can be a lot of chasing of trying to kind of gather things. But to give you a very kind of live example, I'm coaching someone at the moment, and he's a sixth former, and we had our first coaching session, and he really wanted to work on. Basically, he's just spending all his time working and really worried about work, and he's someone who isn't naturally massively social, and so it feels like it's this solo, I'm in my prison of I've just got to do this work, and it never feels like it's enough. And so we had a first session where we unpacked that a little bit, and he kind of he's studying sciences. I originally studied science, so the language of experiments came up. Well, there's a hypothesis that there's a better way of doing this. What experiments would you like to craft to see whether you can gather some data? And so he a week later, we have another conversation. He's come back, he reports on his experiments. Okay, so what would you like to talk about today? I'm not sure, which isn't an uncommon thing.
Yeah.
And I said, well, tell me about your volunteering. And he said, well, a group of us, one of our mums works for a kind of a shelter, and there's a food bank, and we decided that we wanted to publicize this more, so make people who might benefit from it more aware, but also help get donations as well. And he was describing how I said, tell me more. And he said, well, it's me and this group, and there was one guy who kind of was making these excuses, but we kind of called him out, and eventually he decided to come along, and just the tone of and his energy levels as he was describing this, it was this real transformation. And so I played that back to him, and I think just him receiving that seemed to have quite a powerful effect on him. And so yeah, it was lovely to hear. And so then the inquiry became, well, how can you take a little bit of what you got from this and use that with your studies? And so we explored that. Now, the next coaching session is next week, so I can't give you the next installment of the story. But in a small way, that volunteering had helped him change how he saw himself.
Yeah, and I love the entrepreneurial bit hidden away inside that for him.
Yes.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So it's much more than coaching, Chris.
I think what we're trying to do is help people transition from education to the world of work.
Yeah.
It's a journey that can be quite a long journey for some people, and it's difficult. We're just one part of that overall journey. And what is measured at school doesn't necessarily translate very well into what's expected and useful in the workplace.
Yeah.
The World Economic Forum produced a Future of Skills report, and a survey, and in the 2023 version, they ranked sort of lots of different types of jobs. This is a global survey, and kind of what is going to which ones of these are going to need more of in the future and which ones less of. So that's certainly interesting reading for young people. And I've got kids who've just started university, so this thinking about kind of what might the future hold. But then the even more interesting bit was the skills of the future, and analytical thinking, creative thinking. Yes, there's some stuff about AI and big data, but leadership and social influence, resilience, flexibility, agility, curiosity and lifelong learning, empathy and active listening, motivation and self-awareness. And I mean, I've noticed I'm getting a bit emotional just thinking about these things. And then there's a graph that shows what sort of the level of importance, and most of these are across at the high end of it, and then percentage availability on things like Coursera and other MOOC courses. And that's really, really low. So you can't get these skills by just going on an online course.
No.
And yet being coached, doing some volunteering, being exposed to someone who just holds some space for you, gives you a good listening to, can help to start to build some of these skills.
So that's amazing. And I love this start small and see what happens mentality.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've got with your thing.
Very much so. Yeah, there's something scary about the idea of being really big.
Yeah.
So while you're small, you can kind of slightly fly under the radar. But I think we're now starting to say, okay, let's try and let's see how big we can make this. If we believe that it is a fundamentally useful thing for someone to have to be listened to non-judgmentally and just given space to talk about whatever they want to talk about, then let's see where this takes us.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking also it's encouraging people to think and feel and say in a different way than remember and reproduce and all the things that are taught in schools.
Yes, and I think one of the reasons we're still quite small is we haven't done a brilliant job of communicating what coaching is and how it works. And to some extent, that's an act of futility. Until you've actually experienced coaching, no amount of description really tells you. But at a recent assembly that I did for a cohort of year 12s, I tried to give them a sense of what happened just by asking them some basic questions. It was a Monday morning. I said, right, so if I was to ask you, what did you do at the weekend? All of you will now be thinking if you're responding to that question, but it's effectively memory retrieval. If I ask you, how was your weekend? If you had to give your weekend a score out of 10, what score would it be? There's thinking happening now, but notice it's a different type of thinking.
Nice.
And if I was to then ask you, well, thinking about that score, what might have made it, what might have nudged it up a little bit higher and made your weekend slightly better from your perspective? Again, your thinking has gone to different places. And so in coaching, you can expect more of the sorts of questions that take your thinking to new places than memory retrieval type of questions.
That is the best description I've ever heard.
Thank you. I've only used it a couple of times, so we'll see kind of the impact.
I want to hear from you when you've used it 100 times, what it's done. Because that is a way of describing. You know, you just said a minute ago, people need to experience it in order to understand what it is.
Mm.
But you've just put into 3 short phrases a way of giving people half a chance to understand what it is without experiencing it.
Mm. Yeah, because the challenge we have faced is that students sign up, but not all of them go the distance in terms of the coaching. And we're learning that partly that may be because their work is done sooner.
Oh.
Which is, that great. Right? And part of it is because they didn't really know what to expect, and they have been parented, taught, possibly mentored. And so when someone sits there and says, here's a blank sheet of paper, what would you like to think about today? What do you mean? No one's ever asked me that question before.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for this. Now some are more than ready, and one of the things about, you know, as you think about coaching young people is that I believe there is as much, there's much more variety in within the population of young people than there is difference between young people and adults who most of us normally coach. And so actually, I think the most important thing is it's a human to human interaction. And one of the things that working with young people does is it can, as a coach, it can take you to your learning edges a lot quicker than what we're used to doing. And I think that's the challenge, but I think that's what draws me to it, and I think that's what draws a number of the coaches who volunteer with us as well.
Because you have to show up human.
You do, and you realize that some of the language that we're used to using doesn't land, and so we have to be more mindful of that, and that there are assumptions that we you know, it exposes some of the assumptions that we're making as well, and yeah, you can't be all coachy. That's just not going to land. And for some of the students, it takes a while to build up trust, for them to actually want to do the work. I guess in general, when you know, someone signs up and pays for coaching, they've made a considered decision. They've got a pretty clear idea of what they want to work on. Now, we both know that other bits of work turn up along the way, and the real work may emerge. But when you ask that question, what do you want to get out of this? What you know, what are your likely goal areas? Often people have done a bit of thinking about that. I think for students, sometimes that happens. A standout moment for me was pre-pandemic. We did our coaching face to face, and we used to bring students into an office building to give them the experience of what that looked like. And at the time, I was working in West London in this large corporate headquarters that had effectively a street that ran through the middle of it. And a 14-year-old who had been born in Somalia, who I met for the very first time. The teacher had said to me, he struggles a bit at school, kind of, you know, doesn't with kind of, you know, the classroom setting. But we're doing a bit of chit chat as we walk to the place where we're going to do the coaching. We used to do it in the canteen outside of lunchtime hours, so it was a nice open space. And I said, well, you know, tell me a little bit about your dreams. And he said, well, I want to found a tech company the size of Apple or Google. I want to build an office building like this, and I want to set up a foundation for my local community.
So no wonder the classroom was a bit constricting.
Absolutely. And just, you know, again, I've got tingles thinking about this.
Wow.
And what transpired afterwards, so we had our coaching sessions, but what the teacher reported back to me was that there was an invitation for folks in his year to try and get some work experience, but the school wasn't going to organize it for them. Well, he managed to get an internship at Google off his own back. And you're just like, wow, this person is going to fly. This person is absolutely going to fly. Yeah. And so you get the extremes more. And then and part of this I've learned through coaching the young people, but I also now, so completing the journey since 2020, one of the things that I've done is trained as a coach supervisor. And so and actually often because there has sometimes been more supply of coaches than demand from students, I've hung back to let the volunteer coaches make sure that they had a chance to do the coaching. That it's now starting to shift, so I'm now back in coach mode. But I've also been supervising the coaches for the last couple of years, and so get a flavour of themes and stories from that as well. And one of the coaches brought in recently, a student, and kind of, well, we're struggling a little bit with where are your, what would you like to work on? And then, well, imagine 10 years time, how do you see yourself? And this female student said, well, I'm going to be married with a big house, and I'm going to have kids and a nice car. And the coach said, oh, and kind of, is there a place for work in that? Oh, no. And this coach was really confronted by this, because she's a female coach who's got a daughter, and had, to an extent, had to fight for her right to work. And so, just noticing that again, it's taken her to an edge. It's increased that awareness for her. And thinking, how do I respond to this? How do I work with someone, who on the face of it has some ambition, but actually doesn't, it isn't necessarily thinking about, well, how am I actually going to make that happen?
Yeah. So you, in this different space, you encounter different stories, and I love how you can look at your whole thing from a very different distance as a supervisor from as a coach.
Yes.
Wow. I hear all sorts of things about working with young people, from everyone should have coaching to how can you make it work when people don't know, aren't going to respond back. And one of the things that I've picked up as you're talking, Chris, is there is something about how we are in the conversation. So there's something about the coaching, but there's also something about how do I turn up as the coach in order for that even to be a possible thing to start doing. And it's sort of invisible, isn't it? But very strongly felt. And that's true. For me, that's true in whoever we're coaching. They feel us at the same time as experiencing what we're doing.
Definitely. And part of what they may feel is a bit of trepidation.
Yeah.
I'm coaching a young person. I don't know how this is going to be. What if? And sometimes what I've found helpful is actually naming that.
Yeah.
Because odds on, those young people are also, I'm meeting a stranger. We're having to have a conversation online. This feels a bit strange, a bit scary. And so just, I think there's helping to normalize the experience, I think is a really important part of that.
Yeah. And then a great learning, of course, that goes back into all of our work, which is how do we normalize the experience? Yes. So it's like an incubator for coaches to learn about presence.
I think so. And it's interesting because what comes up in supervision, coaches, we often offer supervision for coaches before they've even started. So how are you coming into this? What preconceptions might you have? What biases? What worries? What fears? And I think one of the things that helps me navigate this is just the idea that if you can just be normal and listen to someone, that even if nothing else happens, that was a worthwhile thing to do. That I hold a belief that the world needs more listening, and we don't need to worry about what model am I going to use and am I going to ask the right questions and stuff like that. Trust it will emerge, and so I think there's a real back to basics, but it's a bit that often gets overlooked in the coach training world, because the competencies and the how do we know this is coaching and are you asking the right question bit can and especially at the beginning can really steer us away from that, where the last thing we're thinking about is being present, because we're trying to do our mental gymnastics of, oh my goodness, what do you mean I can't give advice? What do you mean I have to actually, not, I shouldn't be kind of thinking about what I'm going to say next. I should just be listening. And so it takes actually a certain maturity to be able to put that stuff aside.
Yeah. Oh, I had some learning about that yesterday. Which I might share in a minute, but I just want to go back. You said be normal. And that's such a beautiful phrase, isn't it? But actually, I think that sometimes it can take an awful lot of unlearning to be able to be normal. I was on a podcast yesterday as a guest, and we were talking about the phrase that Kim Scott, who wrote Radical Candor, she said, at some point in our 20s, we're told to be professional. At that point, we put on a shell.
Yes.
And I think that whatever shell we did or didn't have, often coach training can get us to put on another shell. And so now we've got, and then all the other shells that we felt we've had to put on. So somewhere inside, there's the human, the normal version of me, the human to human person, and then all of this stuff on the top. So given that you can't fool people, and young people aren't going to play the game of being fooled. Coaching is so not somebody who's sorted working with somebody who isn't. So when you said be normal, I thought, well, there's a lifetime's journey there, isn't there? To be able to do that half of that lovely sentence that you gave.
And it speaks to one of the definitions of leadership that I find really helpful, which is it's being all of yourself with skill.
I love that.
I think it came from the London Business School. And so it speaks to the leader in every single one of us. Yeah. It cuts way beyond positional responsibility. It's your self-leadership. And so that, I guess, lifelong journey of what I would refer to as me search. So how do I know myself well enough to be able to recognize my patterns in different situations, and then with skill dial up or dial down according to the needs of the situation. And coaching is for me is absolutely a form of leadership.
Yeah. All of yourself with skill. Oh, that's beautiful. It's very early in the morning to have this much beautiful wisdom.
Yes. It's but I think this is the kind of the joy of, and sometimes the frustration of working with younger people. You'll get to the extremes quicker.
Yeah.
And it can be very mundane and frustrating stuff, and like you just get ghosted.
Yeah.
Just someone just disappears off the radar, and I know that happens with when we're working with adults as well, but it seems to happen a bit more often here. Or even just very basic things like, if I send a calendar invitation and you don't accept it, then I don't know whether you're coming or not.
Yeah.
So this meeting won't happen. And so again, it's about assumptions that we're making, because we've been habituated to the world of work and certain ways of doing things. And why on earth would a young person know to do that? Because actually, when an adult says to them, you need to be, here's the time, then that's actually not an invitation. It's a kind of, you need to comply with this.
Yeah.
And so here's an adult saying, here's the time. How would they know that to do anything other than what they've been used to doing? And so even in tiny ways like that, it's an opportunity to get a small glimpse of what the world of work might look like, or some slightly different ways of being that can help them start to navigate that journey from education towards the world of work.
Wow. Well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing what you've been doing and what you've been learning, and what an extraordinary thing.
Thank you.
It certainly got me thinking.
Well, what are some of the thoughts that are occurring to you, Claire?
The thing about all of yourself with skill is such a great description of coaching. And I love it when somebody says something that's not quite the same as what you're thinking, but it's in the same kind of space, because it allows you to go to that place and start revisiting your own thoughts, doesn't it? And you've said a few things in this, so when I'm editing it, I shall look forward to hearing them again.
And going full circle, you said that back to the beginning of our conversation, you said that you and some colleagues have been thinking about kind of coaching.
Yeah.
What were some of the questions or thoughts that had been emerging then?
Well, I came to coaching from being a secondary school teacher, and two of my colleagues came to coaching from being youth workers. So part of that is, how do we connect where we've been and what we know with what we now know, in a way of connecting in different spaces. But what was extraordinary was that week that you emailed me, I'd been contacted by 3 or 4 different people, all about the same subject. So we've got somebody coming up in a couple of weeks who coaches sixth formers. So for those of you in the States, that's young people who are 16 to 18 years old. Someone else was talking about using coaching with families. Somebody else was talking about using coaching with, so Chloe Garland was talking about quarter life coaching, which is working with people in their 20s. So yeah, it all kind of came together. And I don't know whether that's because I was looking and then you notice everything, don't you? Or whether it just did kind of all come together. But I'm really grateful, because it just opens up the conversation. And I know that our listeners will be bouncing off this and thinking all sorts of things.
Yeah, lovely.
So are you open to conversations with people?
Very much so. Especially actually more folks who are engaged in this sort of work. Would definitely like to learn from folks who are further down the journey. And I think I set this up as a charity to give it credibility, because we don't fundraise, so we don't need the money, and I think there's lots of little charities out there all kind of doing their thing, and actually, does the world need more charities? I don't think it necessarily does, but could we be a bit more joined up? And I think absolutely. I think so. I'd love to speak to folks who are interested in just exploring and whether that leads to partnerships or just mutual shared learning. I think this is an exciting space to be in. If I step out and think of, it's not difficult to look at kind of where the world is today and to have an element of kind of like, oh my goodness, where's it going? And I know historically we've been in these cycles before, and where it's going is in the hands of young people.
Yeah.
And so how can we give support and resource them in as many possible ways as, and gosh, imagine if they were equipped with really good listening skills. Yeah, that could be a game changer.
Yeah. So how do people contact you to talk about those things?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Paterson with 1T, or you can email me, chris@givingtime.org.uk.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for coming. Delightful to catch up with you and to hear all these things. Amazing. That has got me thinking. And thank you everyone for listening. And we'll be back next week with another episode. Bye-bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, we'd love you to share the podcast with a friend or leave a comment on social media. And if you'd like to become a regular at the Coaching Inn, you can subscribe on Podbean and all major podcast channels. We look forward to welcoming you next time. You've been listening to The Coaching Inn, 3D Coaching's virtual pub. For more information, check out 3dcoaching.com.